The HOA built a resort hotel on my private island, and I let them. I watched them bulldoze the dock I built for my late wife, the one place that still felt like hers. The HOA president just smirked and handed me a fine for trespassing on my own land, waving forged papers in my face as she ordered her construction crews in. But while they were pouring millions of dollars into their grand resort, they had no idea they were building it all for me. They'd made one tiny mistake in their paperwork, a mistake that was about to turn their palace into my personal $150 million payday. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this revenge is served ice cold. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied off their own land, hit that subscribe button, because you're not going to want to miss watching this queen's castle come crashing down. The sun wasn't even over the ridge yet when I pushed my rowboat into the water. The fog hung low on the lake, so thick you could taste the pine in it. Every morning for 25 years, this was my ritual. Me, the boat, and the quiet glide across the half-mile of water to the island. My island. It wasn't much, just a half-acre of rock and cedar, but it was the only place left on Earth that felt like it belonged to Sarah and me. I'd bought it with the last of our savings after the cancer took her. As a Navy Seabee, I'd built runways in deserts and bases in jungles. But the small dock and footbridge on that island were the most important things I ever put my hands on. They were sturdy, simple, and meant to last. Just like her, I was tying up the boat when a voice sliced through the morning calm, sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Mendez, a word, if you please." I turned. On the shore stood Marcia Klein, the new HOA president. She held a clipboard like a weapon, and even from 50 yards away, I could feel the self-importance rolling off her in waves. I rowed back, my gut already telling me this wasn't a social call. She didn't wait for me to get out of the boat. She just tapped a manicured finger on her clipboard. "Your unapproved structures are in violation of shoreline conformity rules," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed. "Specifically, the dock and that makeshift bridge. They do not meet our community's aesthetic standard." I almost laughed. I'd been here since this neighborhood was just dirt roads and surveyor stakes. I helped pour the foundations for half the houses on this lake. "Marcia, my island isn't part of the HOA. It never has been." She gave me a tight, condescending smile. The kind of smile that says, "You poor, simple man. That's been rectified," she said smoothly. "Lake access is a community asset now. It all belongs to the homeowners." She handed me a crisp envelope. Inside was an official-looking letter, fining me $500 per day, until I tore down my own dock. "You have 30 days to comply," she added, already turning to leave. "We're cleaning this place up." I spent the rest of the morning at the county records office, my hands smelling of old paper and dust. I was sure it was just a bluff, some bureaucratic mix-up, but there it was, filed 3 months ago, a revised property plat, a brand new survey map, signed and stamped. On the old map, my island was a clearly marked private parcel. On the new one, it was colored in the same shade as the community park and labeled HOA Common Area B. It was like seeing a ghost. A piece of paper was telling me that 25 years of my life, the one piece of solid ground I had left, was a fiction. A clerk with tired eyes told me it was a legal refiling. There was nothing he could do. The sting of it was deeper than just land. These were my neighbors. I'd helped Glenn Porter's dad fix his roof last winter. I'd loaned my generator to the Voss family during the ice storm. I thought we looked out for each other. But as I drove home, I saw the little community improvement project signs that had popped up on lawns. Marcia's slogan. It felt like they'd all voted to erase me. I went to her house that evening, holding the new plat map. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not a yeller. I was trained to solve problems, not create them. "Marcia, there's been a huge mistake," I started, pointing to the revised boundary line. "This isn't right. You can't just resurvey my property and claim it." She didn't even look at the map. She was watering her petunias, refusing to look me in the eye. "The board voted," she said, snipping a dead blossom. "It's for the good of the community. Property values, you know. She finally turned to me, and her eyes were cold, almost reptilian. Frankly, Jack, that shabby little island is an eyesore. You'll thank us when it's been properly developed. And then she gave me that smirk again. It was the smirk of someone who had all the spirit, power, and knew you had none. The smirk of a bully who had found the perfect victim. My hands tightened on the rolled-up map. All my training, all my discipline, was screaming at me to stay calm. She wasn't worth it. But as I walked away, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't about a dock anymore. This was about theft. The next morning, I was woken up by the low growl of diesel engines. It was just after dawn, but the sound was already echoing across the water. I ran to the shoreline, my heart pounding in my chest. There, chugging across the lake, was a barge carrying a small bulldozer and a crew of 4 men in hard hats. They were headed for my island. Behind them, on a sleek pontoon boat, stood Marcia Klein, pointing and directing them like a general leading an invasion. I scrambled into my rowboat, paddling furiously to intercept them. A younger man, broad and wearing a shirt with HOA security stitched on the front, blocked my path at the dock. It was Glenn Porter, the HOA's vice president and Marcia's loyal shadow. He puffed out his chest, trying to look official. "Can't let you over there, Jack. It's an active construction site now. For your own safety." I looked past him, at the men already unloading the bulldozer onto Sarah's island. "You can't do this, Glenn. That's my land. You know it is." He just shrugged, avoiding my eyes. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket. "We've got the permits right here. It's HOA property now. You need to stay on this side of the lake." I watched, helpless, as the bulldozer roared to life. Its steel blade bit into the earth, tearing up the wildflowers Sarah and I had planted years ago. They started with the footbridge, splintering the hand-hewn cedar planks in a single, brutal shove. From her boat, I could see Marcia smile. That's when the quiet, patient builder in me died, and the CB took over. They had declared war. They just didn't realize I knew how to fight one. My first calls were to the county planning department and then the state land board. I spent 2 days on the phone, being transferred from one bored-sounding clerk to another, explaining the situation calmly and clearly. I sent them copies of my original deed from 25 years ago, the one Sarah and I had framed. The response was always the same, a polite but firm dead end. "I understand your frustration, sir, but the most recent survey on file is the one we have to go by. If you have a dispute with your homeowners association, that's a civil matter. A civil matter." It felt like my house was on fire, and the fire department was telling me to have a polite chat with the arsonist. If the system wouldn't help me, I'd have to go through them. I went to the monthly HOA meeting, held in the chilly, fluorescent-lit basement of the community clubhouse. The air smelled of stale coffee and self-importance. I sat in the back, my original deed and property maps in a neat folder on my lap, and waited for my turn to speak. About 40 people were there, most of them retirees. I knew nearly all of them. Marcia sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by Glenn Porter and a woman I recognized as Linda Voss, the treasurer. Marcia ran the meeting like a drill sergeant, her voice sharp and final on every point, from new mailbox regulations to the acceptable shade of beige for exterior trim. When she finally opened the floor for homeowner concerns, I stood up. I kept my voice steady. "My name is Jack Mendez. Some of you know me. I've lived on this lake for 25 years. I started to walk forward, holding up my folder. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about the ownership of the island." I never got to finish. Marcia banged a small wooden gavel on the table. The sound cracked through the quiet room. "Mr. Mendez, you are out of order," she declared, her voice dripping with practiced authority. "The board has already addressed your non-compliance. You were given a chance to rectify the situation, and you refused. This matter is closed." I stopped in my tracks. "This is my property we're talking about. I have the deed right here." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody spoke up. They just stared at their hands or at the scuffed linoleum floor. Marcia's eyes narrowed. The community has decided to move forward with a project that will benefit everyone. We will not allow one disgruntled individual to stand in the way of progress. The room was dead silent. I looked at the faces of my neighbors, people I'd shared a beer with, people whose kids I'd taught how to skip stones. They looked away. In that moment, I felt a kind of humiliation that was colder and heavier than any anger. I was an outcast in my own home. I turned and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me out. I was halfway to my truck when a quiet voice called my name. Jack. Hold up. It was Eddie Tran. He was a small, wiry man who lived a few streets over, a retired county surveyor. He had a reputation for being cranky and keeping to himself, but he always gave a nod when we passed on the road. He caught up to me, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Don't let that windbag get to you," he grumbled, jerking his head back toward the clubhouse. "She's a bully with a binder." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "I saw that new plat map they filed. It's garbage." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Eddie kicked at a loose piece of gravel. "The survey markers they cite for the new boundary? They're fraudulent. They pulled an old reference point from a defunct county project from the 70s and applied it to a new digital easement. It's a slick trick if you don't know what you're looking for. To a desk clerk, it looks legit." Hope, hot and sharp, shot through me. "Can you prove it?" He gave me a thin, crooked smile. "I spent 30 years of my life signing off on honest maps. I can spot a forgery from a mile away." "Yeah, I can prove it." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But it's going to take time, Jack. I need to dig up the original archives, chain of title documents, maybe even find the original survey crew. It won't be fast." I could have hugged him. "Take all the time you need, Eddie. Just tell me what you need from me." He just nodded. "Stay quiet for now. Let her think she's won. The bigger she builds her case, the harder it'll fall." I clung to that hope for the next 2 weeks. It was a small, flickering flame in a hurricane. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of their machines across the water. First, it was just the bulldozer, leveling the small clearing where Sarah and I used to have picnics. Then came the chainsaws. I watched them drop the old cedars, one by one, trees that were standing long before any of us were born. A week later, a new barge arrived. This one, carrying a piling driver. I stood on my shore and watched them pound the first steel supports for a massive new dock directly into the spot where mine used to be. The rhythmic, percussive slam echoed across the water, a death knell for my quiet sanctuary. I was ordered off what they now called community property. Glenn Porter would park his golf cart, now fitted with a flashing yellow light, at the end of my driveway, just to watch me. Then came the day I stood there, coffee going cold in my hand, watching them rip my old dock from the water. They pulled up the boards I'd laid, the posts I'd set. They dragged the pieces onto the shore like the carcass of an animal and loaded them onto a truck. From her pontoon boat, which she now kept moored just offshore, Marcia Klein watched the entire operation. She had a thermos in one hand and a pair of binoculars in the other, directing the crew like a queen overseeing the dismantling of a conquered castle. She was taking it all, every board, every nail, every memory. She thought she was erasing me. She had no idea she was just giving me a blueprint. I looked at the stripped island, the raw earth, the new steel pilings gleaming in the sun. They took everything Sarah and I built. A cold calm settled over me, pushing out the rage. I'll get it back, I thought. But not the way they expect. Not anymore. The big announcement came via a glossy email blast to the entire neighborhood. Marcia had given her project a name, the Lakeside Members Lodge. It was, according to her, a 5-star amenity that would elevate our community profile and enhance property values for everyone. The email included a digital rendering of a sleek, modern building with a wall of glass windows, sprawling decks, and an infinity pool that seemed to spill right into the lake. It was a beautiful picture, and it was sitting right on top of the ashes of my wife's garden. The war nobody saw coming had begun. But you don't fight a war with sledgehammers when the enemy is using spreadsheets and legal documents. You fight it with intelligence. I stopped trying to argue. I stopped making phone calls. Instead, my workshop became my war room. Every morning, just before sunrise, I'd take my boat out, staying a good 100 yards offshore. With a pair of high-powered binoculars and a telephoto lens on my old camera, I became the most dedicated construction supervisor they never knew they had. I didn't care about their progress. I cared about their mistakes. And they made a lot of them. I spent 20 years as a CB. I know building codes the way a priest knows scripture. From my boat, I documented everything. The concrete forms for the foundation were set 2 feet inside the shoreline setback, a clear violation of county environmental rules. When they ran the plumbing, I watched them lay the septic drain field too close to the water table. The plans for that system were a joke. Designed to handle a 2-bedroom cabin, not a 10-room hotel with a commercial kitchen. I took photos of the subcontractor's truck dumping leftover drywall and insulation into a makeshift pit behind the building site, instead of hauling it away. Every evening, I'd go back to my workshop and log the date, time, and violation in a thick notebook, cross-referencing it with the county building and environmental codes I'd printed off the internet. My quiet anger was turning into a cold, methodical purpose. The humiliation I'd felt at that HOA meeting was hardening into steel in my gut. While they were busy building their monument to greed, I was busy building my case. The social climate in the neighborhood grew colder. When I went to the hardware store for supplies, I saw Bob from down the street in the plumbing aisle. We'd known each other for 15 years. He saw me. His eyes widened for a second, and then he just looked down at a shelf of PVC fittings and pretended I wasn't there. The rumors started soon after. Whispers that I was unstable, that I'd become a recluse. Linda Voss, the HOA treasurer, told someone at the post office that I'd been seen lurking by the construction site at night. Marcia was poisoning the well, making sure that if I ever did speak up, no one would listen. I was the crazy old man on the shore, the obstacle to everyone else's rising property values. Most nights, I'd just sit on my porch, listen to the whine of their generators across the water, and wonder how a community could turn on one of its own so quickly. One night, there was a soft knock at my back door. It was Eddie Tran. He was holding a slim manila folder and looking over his shoulder like a spy in an old movie. "Got something for you," he said, stepping inside. He spread a few documents across my kitchen table. They weren't maps this time. They were financial statements. They couldn't get a normal construction loan, he explained, his finger tracing a line of dense text. No bank would touch a project with a clouded title. So Marcia and her board, they got creative. They secured financing from a group of private equity investors out of the city. He tapped a signature line. They used the island itself as collateral, signed the deed over as security. The cold knot in my stomach tightened. They were using my land to pay for its own destruction. "There's more," Eddie said, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. They were so arrogant, so sure of themselves, that they got sloppy. He slid another paper in front of me. "Read that." It was a clause in the loan agreement. To make it look airtight, they'd tied the collateral to a holding company name they'd invented, one that sounded official. Jack Mendez Island Holdings, LLC. The blood drained from my face. They had put my name on their fraudulent document. I decided to test the waters, to see just how deep Marcia's influence went. From a public computer at the library, I drafted an anonymous email to the County Code Enforcement Office. It was short, professional, and pointed out the shoreline setback violation, citing the specific ordinance number. I attached one of my telephoto pictures, which clearly showed the foundation forms and the water's edge. 2 days later, a miracle happened. A county inspector showed up, and a big orange stop work order was slapped on the site entrance. For 24 hours, the island was silent. The victory felt hollow, but it was something. The next morning, the notice was gone. The sounds of hammers and saws started up again, louder than ever. I saw Marcia on site, laughing with the foreman. She had gotten the order lifted. She had a friend in the right office, a favor she could call in. It was a clear message. The rules didn't apply to her. I sat in my boat that evening, watching the frame of the building rise against the sunset. It was no longer a mess of foundation and rebar. It was starting to look like a building. And in that moment, watching the skeleton of their resort take shape, a new plan began to form in my mind. A much better plan. Eddie's proof could bog them down in court for years. We might win, but I'd inherit a half-finished, debt-ridden mess on my land, a monument to the fight. But what if I didn't stop them? What if I let them keep going? Let them pour every last cent from their investors into it. Let them finish the plumbing, hang the drywall, install the fancy windows. Let them build their entire castle on their foundation of lies. They thought they were building a trap for me. They had no idea they were the ones already caught in it. I just had to wait for them to finish building the walls. The months dragged on. Summer turned to fall. The leaves on the maples across the lake turning a brilliant, mocking red. The resort grew day by day, a monument of glass and cedar rising from the ground where my memories used to be. The framing was finished, then the roof, then the windows. I watched them install geothermal heating pumps and a commercial-grade kitchen that probably cost more than my entire house. Marcia was a local celebrity now. A crew from the regional news station came out to do a feature on her visionary community project. I watched the interview from my living room. There she was, standing on the resort's half-finished deck, wearing a hard hat that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust. She spoke about community innovation and forward-thinking leadership. She didn't mention my name, of course. To the world, it was as if I never existed, as if that island had just been sitting there, waiting for her to come along and give it purpose. The county records office confirmed it. A quick search showed my name had been completely scrubbed from the property's chain of title. Officially, I was a ghost. A couple of my old CB buddies, Frank and Dave, drove up for a weekend to go fishing. They hadn't seen the lake in over a year. When they pulled into my driveway, their faces fell. Frank just stood there, looking out at the massive structure on the island, his mouth hanging open. "What in the hell is that, Jack?" I spent the next hour explaining the whole sordid story. Dave, who'd been a master at arms, was practically vibrating with anger. "You've got to sue them into oblivion, Jack. We'll get you a lawyer, a bulldog. We can crowdfund it if we have to." I just shook my head, my eyes fixed on the building across the water. "Not yet," I said quietly. "The timing's not right." They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. To them, it was simple. Someone wronged you. You hit back. Hard. They didn't understand that my war wasn't about hitting back. It was about taking everything. They didn't see the bigger picture, the long game I was playing. They just saw a friend who looked defeated, and it tore them up. They left on Sunday, promising to call and check in, their faces etched with worry. As I watched their truck disappear down the road, a wave of profound loneliness washed over me. For a moment, I felt the suffocating weight of it all. The isolation, the whispers, the daily spectacle of my own erasure. The breaking point came a week later. It was a Saturday morning, and a small group of teenagers was milling around the community boathouse just down the shore from my property. They were wearing matching bright yellow t-shirts that said HOA Community Volunteer. Supervising them, with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, was Glenn Porter. He was directing them to pick up litter along the shoreline. Later that afternoon, I went down to my own boathouse to work on my boat's motor, and I saw it. Scrawled across the peeling white paint of the door, in thick black spray paint, was a single word: trespasser. I stared at it, my knuckles turning white as I gripped a wrench. It wasn't just paint on a door. It was a public branding. They had labeled me an intruder in my own life. Glenn must have seen me. He sauntered over, a smug look on his face. "Looks like you've got a little graffiti problem there, Jack," he said, his tone oozing false sympathy. "Teenagers, you know. But then again, Folks are getting pretty upset about you lurking around community property." I didn't say a word. I just looked from the ugly black letters back to his face. There was no doubt in my mind who had put them up to it. It was a coordinated, deliberate act of humiliation. That night, for the first time, I considered giving up. I pulled out a phone book and looked up real estate agents. I could sell the house, take the money, and move somewhere quiet where nobody knew my name. I could leave Marcia to her kingdom of beige in her glass palace. The thought of it was like acid in my throat. It felt like letting her win. It felt like letting Sarah down. Just as I was about to close the book, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Eddie. "Come over. Now." It's a full-blown emergency. When I got to his house, he didn't waste any time. He had a stack of papers spread across his dining table, and his face was pale, his eyes wide. "I got it, Jack. I got the smoking gun." He shoved a document into my hand. It was a copy of the final loan agreement between the HOA and their private investors. My finger traced the lines of legalese until it landed on the collateral clause, the same one he'd shown me before. Jack Mendez Island Holdings, LLC. Eddie's voice was barely a whisper. I thought that name sounded strange. I did a search with the Secretary of State's Corporations Division. "Jack, that LLC doesn't exist. It has never been registered. It's a completely fictitious entity." I looked at him, confused. "So they just made it up?" "They made it up," Eddie confirmed, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "They created a phantom owner to secure their loan. It's wire fraud, mail fraud, and about 10 other kinds of felonies. But that's not the best part." He leaned in, his eyes gleaming. "There is nothing, legally, preventing someone from forming a new LLC under that exact name, right now." Today, a light went on in my head. A brilliant, blinding, beautiful light. The plan that had been slowly forming in my mind finally clicked into place, every piece locking together with a satisfying thud. The next morning, I was at my computer. I didn't hire a lawyer. I used a simple online service. For a filing fee of $150, I registered a new limited liability company with the state. The name of that company? Jack Mendez Island Holdings, LLC. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was an official, embossed certificate from the Secretary of State. I now possessed the one thing Marcia's entire empire was built on: a legal identity. Using an obscure but powerful clause in state property law regarding liens against improperly titled collateral, I filled out the paperwork to file for an ownership restoration. I was claiming the asset, the land, and everything built upon it on behalf of the now legal entity that held the debt. I mailed the sealed, notarized documents to the county recorder's office. All I had to do now was wait for them to finish the resort, wait for the final occupancy certificate to be issued. The moment that happened, the moment their project was officially complete, the legal trap would spring. Every board, every nail, every pane of ridiculously expensive glass would belong to me. The next 3 months were the longest of my life. I had to become invisible. I kept my head down, my mouth shut, and my eyes open. I watched as landscaping crews laid down perfect rolls of sod and planted mature birch trees. I watched them install custom lighting that made the resort glow like a jewel on the water at night. I watched the final county inspectors come and go, ticking off boxes on their clipboards. Eddie kept me updated. The final occupancy permit was issued on a Tuesday. The grand opening was scheduled for that Saturday. The whole neighborhood was buzzing. Marcia had outdone herself, arranging for catered food trucks, a live band, and even getting the local TV news to cover the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She was finally getting her monument, her moment in the sun. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of calm a hunter feels when the prey has finally walked into the crosshairs. The rage I'd carried for so long had been forged into something cold, heavy, and patient. The night of the grand opening, I didn't go. I sat on my porch and watched the party from across the lake. The music drifted over the water, punctuated by laughter and applause. I saw the flashbulbs from the news cameras, I saw Marcia, resplendent in a white power suit, holding up a giant pair of scissors and cutting a big, red ribbon. She was the queen of her castle. She had won. That night, after the last of the party boats had motored back to shore and the lights of the resort dimmed, I drove to the county recorder's office. It was a 24-hour filing depository, a simple metal slot in a brick wall. In my hands, I held a thick envelope. Inside was a copy of my LLC's certificate of formation, the notarized title lien documents, Eddie's detailed survey affidavits proving the original fraud, and the final deed transfer paperwork. It was a package of legal dynamite, and I was about to light the fuse. I slid the envelope into the slot. The quiet thud as it landed inside was the only sound in the deserted parking lot. It was done. The gears of justice, the ones that had been so rusted and stuck for me, were finally beginning to turn. I drove home and slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, for the first time in almost a year. The next HOA meeting was 2 weeks later. This time, the community clubhouse basement was packed. Word of the successful grand opening had brought everyone out. The mood was triumphant. Marcia was holding court, accepting congratulations and laying out her grand plans for Phase 2 of the Community Improvement Project. I waited in the back. Just as before, I let her go through her entire agenda: the budget approvals, the committee reports, the condescending reminders about lawn maintenance. When she opened the floor for new business, I stood up. A low murmur went through the room. Heads turned. Marcia's smile tightened into a thin, irritated line. "Mr. Mendez," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I believe we've made it abundantly clear that your concerns have been addressed. The Lakeside Lodge is a community asset. This matter is—" "I'm not here to talk about my concerns," I interrupted, my voice calm and even. It carried across the room, cutting through the chatter. I started walking toward the head table, just as I had all those months ago. This time, no one stopped me. "I'm here to talk about your concerns." I placed a single, thin folder on the table in front of her. She stared at it, as if it were a snake. "What is this?" she snapped. "That," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is a copy of the new title deed for the island and all improvements thereon. As of 8:01 a.m. yesterday, it was officially recorded by the county." Her face went blank. A few people in the front row leaned forward, trying to see. "You built your beautiful resort on my property," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "Every board, every nail, every ridiculously expensive window. It was all a very generous gift. Thank you." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound like the air being sucked out of a vacuum. Marcia's face had gone from confused to a blotchy, furious red. "This is absurd," she sputtered, fumbling to open the folder. "Security. Glenn, remove this." "Man!" But Glenn Porter was frozen, staring at me with a look of dawning horror. Linda Voss, the treasurer, was already backing her chair away from the table. "Is that so?" I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Let's find out." I hit the speakerphone button. A calm, professional voice filled the room. "County Recorder's Office, this is Susan speaking." "Susan," I said clearly, "my name is Jack Mendez. Could you please confirm the current registered owner of Parcel 7A listed as Lakeside Island?" There was a moment of keyboard clicking. The entire room held its breath. "Certainly, sir," Susan's voice chirped back. "As of yesterday's filing, that parcel, including all structures and improvements, is registered to a single owner entity, Jack Mendez Island Holdings LLC. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the stained carpet. Marcia's jaw worked, but no sound came out. She looked at the faces around the room, searching for an ally, for someone to tell her this was all a joke. But all she saw were stunned, horrified stares. Her empire, built on lies and petty tyranny, had just crumbled to dust in front of everyone. "You can't do this," she finally whispered, her voice a hoarse croak. I leaned in, close enough so only she could hear me. "I didn't do this. You did." Then I straightened up and addressed the room again. "And one more thing. The assessed value of the improvements you so kindly made to my property comes to just under $148 million. The investors who hold the loan on that fraudulent deed are probably going to want that back. I suggest you call a lawyer." That's when Marcia Klein fainted, slumping out of her chair and onto the floor with a soft thud. And as her loyal followers rushed to her side, the news crews, who had been lingering outside after a tip-off from a certain retired surveyor, swarmed into the room, their cameras rolling. The aftermath was a storm. The news story went from a local curiosity to a regional sensation overnight. My face was on TV, not as a disgruntled old man, but as the quiet builder who had outsmarted a corrupt HOA. The phones didn't stop ringing. Lawyers, reporters, and even a book publisher. The HOA, naturally, tried to fight back. They hired a team of expensive lawyers from the city, who immediately filed an emergency motion to reverse the title transfer, claiming fraud. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, took one look at Eddie's meticulously documented survey fraud and the non-existent LLC on the loan documents. She threw their case out in less than 15 minutes, calling their legal arguments frivolous and, frankly, insulting to the court's intelligence. That's when the real panic set in. The private equity investors, the ones who had funded Marcia's palace, were now on the hook for a $148 million loan with zero collateral. Their lawyers descended on the HOA like wolves. The rats started jumping from the sinking ship. Linda Voss, the treasurer, was the first to crack, facing potential fraud charges herself. She cut a deal with the district attorney. She handed over years of doctored financial records, emails, and minutes from secret board meetings where Marcia had outlined her plan to seize my island. It turned out Marcia's ambition went far beyond a simple resort. She had been in talks with developers to sell the entire lakefront, using the lodge as a centerpiece for a massive new commercial development. The community she claimed to be improving was just a commodity to be sold off to the highest bidder. Marcia, however, refused to go down without a fight. She was cornered, desperate, and that made her even more dangerous. She tried to sabotage the resort itself. Her next move was to get the occupancy permit voided. If she couldn't have the building, no one would. She found the county inspector who had originally signed off on the project, the same one who'd made the stop work order disappear, and offered him a briefcase full of cash to retroactively fail the inspection, citing fictitious electrical and plumbing hazards. She was trying to declare the building unsafe, making it worthless to me or anyone else. It was a classic scorched earth tactic. What she didn't know was that the inspector, seeing the writing on the wall and not wanting to go to prison for her, had already paid a visit to the DA's office. He walked into his meeting with Marcia wearing a wire. The entire bribery attempt, every wheedling promise and veiled threat she made, was recorded in crystal-clear audio. That recording was the final nail in her coffin. The county DA now had her dead to rights, on bribery, conspiracy, and a whole host of other felony charges. The entire HOA board was implicated. They turned on her completely, each one trying to paint themselves as an unwitting victim of her manipulative schemes. Glenn Porter claimed he was just following orders. Linda Voss played the part of the dutiful treasurer who was too intimidated to speak up. It was a pathetic, predictable cascade of cowardice. The HOA called an emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't in the stuffy clubhouse basement. They had to rent the high school auditorium to accommodate the crowd. Every homeowner was there, along with news crews from 3 different stations, their cameras set up in the back. The meeting was broadcast live online. The mood was no longer triumphant. It was terrified. People were worried about their property values now, about the massive legal bills the HOA had incurred, about the stain of scandal that was now splattered all over their neighborhood. The remaining board members, their faces pale and drawn, tried to calm the crowd, but the room was a tinderbox of anger and fear. Then they invited me to speak. I walked to the podium at the front of the stage. the same stage where I'd watched my daughter graduate years ago. The room fell silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just looked out at the faces of my neighbors, the ones who had shunned me, the ones who had chuckled at my humiliation, and the few who had looked away in shame. For the last year, I began, my voice steady, this community has been run by fear and greed. You were promised higher property values, but you were sold a lie. I let that sink in. I have no interest in running a resort hotel, but I also have no interest in letting this monument to corruption sit empty. I paused, then delivered the final blow. This morning, I finalized the sale of the resort and the island to a national corporate retreat chain. The sale price was $150 million. A wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the auditorium. The sale was contingent on one condition, I continued, my voice rising slightly. A portion of the proceeds, $10 million to be exact, will be placed into a community restitution fund. Now, the silence was absolute. That fund will be managed by an independent trustee. It will be used to pay off every single bogus fine this HOA has levied for the past 5 years. It will compensate any homeowner who was forced to make unnecessary modifications at their own expense. And it will pay for the immediate and complete dissolution of this current HOA. The room exploded. It started as a ripple of applause from a few people in the back and grew into a thunderous, standing ovation. People were cheering, hugging, some were even crying. It was the sound of a pressure valve being released, of a long nightmare finally ending. In the midst of the chaos, I saw them. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies had entered from a side door. They walked calmly and directly to the front row where Marcia Klein was sitting, stone-faced. They leaned down, spoke to her quietly, and then, as the whole room watched, she stood up and placed her hands behind her back. The sharp click of the handcuffs was drowned out by the roar of the crowd, but I saw it. I watched as they escorted the queen of the clipboards, the architect of all this misery, out of the auditorium. Her reign was over. And as the applause washed over me, it wasn't triumph I felt, but a profound sense of relief. The showdown was over. The balance had been restored. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered publicly for everyone to see. 6 months later, the lake was quiet again. The new owners of the resort, a company that specialized in corporate wellness retreats, were good neighbors. They were respectful of the environment, kept the noise down, and hired dozens of locals to staff the place, paying them fair wages with benefits. The bright, garish sign that once read, "The Lakeside Members Lodge," was replaced by a simple, elegant wooden one that just said, "Cedar Point Retreat." They even asked for my input on the landscaping around the shoreline to make sure it matched the natural look of the area. I didn't want the money from the sale. Not for myself, anyway. After setting up the Community Restitution Fund, I took a large portion of what was left and established a perpetual scholarship fund in my wife's name. The Sarah Mendez Engineering Grant would provide a full-ride scholarship every year to a child from a veteran's family who wanted to study engineering or construction management. Sarah had always believed that the most noble thing a person could do was to build something that would last longer than they would. It felt right. It felt like I was finally building something with her again. With a small piece of the remaining funds, I hired a local crew to help me rebuild, not the island, but what was mine on it, in the exact same spot as the original. Using the same simple, sturdy design, we built a new dock and a new footbridge. I used weathered cedar that matched the old wood, so it looked like it had always been there. It wasn't a monument, it was a memory. The rest of the island I left alone, letting the wildflowers and native grasses grow back over the scars the bulldozers had left. Nature, I figured, had a better plan for it than I ever could. The old HOA was dissolved, buried under an avalanche of lawsuits and criminal charges. Marcia Klein took a plea bargain and is now serving 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary for fraud and bribery. Glenn Porter lost his security job and now works nights stocking shelves at the grocery store. I see him sometimes in the aisles, and he never makes eye contact. The neighborhood formed a new, smaller community association. It was run by a council of volunteers, and their first order of business was to nominate a new president. Unanimously, they elected Eddie Tran. His first official act was to draft a new bylaw, one that was just a single sentence long: "Be a good neighbor." They printed it on a small plaque and hung it in the clubhouse. Underneath it, someone taped a handwritten sign that read, "No Karens allowed." Things slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Neighbors started waving to me again, then stopping to chat. Bob from the hardware store came by one afternoon with a six-pack of beer and apologized. He said he was ashamed he hadn't spoken up, that he'd let Marcia's promises of higher property values blind him. I told him to forget it, and we sat on my porch and drank the beer as the sun went down. Most of them were like Bob, not bad people, just people who had been afraid to rock the boat. They had learned a hard lesson about what happens when you let a bully take the wheel. The story became a sort of local legend, a cautionary tale about power and patience. People would point out the island from their boats. "See that place?" they'd say. "That's the $150 million hotel a guy got for free because the HOA president messed with the wrong Navy Seabee." They usually got the details wrong, but they always got the moral of the story right. Justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it doesn't come in a courtroom with lawyers and judges. Sometimes you just have to have the patience to let your enemies build their own gallows, and the courage to be there when they're finished. This morning, just like every morning for the past 25 years, I pushed my rowboat into the water. The sun wasn't even over the ridge yet, and the fog hung low on the lake. The air was cool and smelled of pine. I rowed across the still, dark water, the only sound, the gentle splash of my oars. When I reached the island, I tied my boat to the new dock, the knots familiar in my hands. I walked across the small footbridge and sat on the bench I'd built at the water's edge. The lights from the retreat on the far side of the island were just starting to dim as their early rising guests finished their yoga sessions. They glowed, softly, reflecting on the surface of the lake like a new constellation of stars. It was quiet. It was peaceful. Everything was as it should be. The island was mine again, but it was different now. The ghosts were still here, but they were gentler. It was a place not of loss, but of resilience. A place that reminded me that, even after the worst storms, if the foundation is strong enough, you can always rebuild. And as the first rays of sunlight broke over the treetops, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, deep and unshakable. Sarah was gone, but what we had built together, in a way, was still here. And it was safe. Peace was finally, truly restored.